Hello, fellow Minecraftians, and welcome back to Realm News. I hope that you all have had a great weekend since the last episode. For those of you who are new to Realm News, I am your host, the Dark Lord, the one who puts the real in Realm and expands your mind one block at a time. This is the podcast where I deepen the game of Minecraft by relating a different item or block in Minecraft with real-world knowledge every week. This week, we have a very interesting show. We are discussing time, specifically the Minecraft clock, the item that you may or may not be aware about. By the time we are done with this episode, you will know everything about the Minecraft clock, its behavior, uses, and history. This will be linked to the real segment of the show by taking a peek into history and seeing how we humans started playing with time. However, if you would like to learn more about time in the game of Minecraft, such as how long the days are and how the moon and sun affect everything in the overworld, then you will need to go back to episode 4, titled The Overworld Celestial Bodies. They say time is of the essence, so let's start this show. It's poll time! Yes, it is poll time, my friends, where we hear from the Minecraft community themselves. And did we hear from them on this week's poll? This had a great turnout. 83 total votes this week, people. That makes it one of the most popular polls so far. And it was all based off of this question that I posed. Minecraft clocks. Do you use it? This was a 3-choice question. Yes, occasionally, and no. Shall we begin with the loser of the poll this week? The loser with a measly 8 votes out of a grand 83 is the Yes group. As you can see, the clock does not garner much support in Minecraft. I tend to forget about them myself until I travel through one of my towns that has one hung up somewhere. I do have 2 clocks in my world that is over a year and a half old. I've only constructed 2 clocks in a year and a half is what I meant to say. They both serve as decoration in 2 of my towns. I placed one in Seatown, my capital city, on the face of the center block of a waterfall I constructed in the old downtown area of that town, in that city. And I just placed another one in respect to this episode in my newest town called Limnos, which is a desert island near the Karth Desert. But surprisingly, many of the comments that I received were from those who utilized the clock. Allow me to read off some of these comments. I will start with Ganubatal. Quote, we're talking about the item, right? I'm using it frequently, e.g. to see when villagers are ready to trade again while I impatiently wait. Or when I'm underground and don't want to run into a creeper when I resurface, end quote. That's a good comment. I personally am not much of a trader, as you all know. I have a lot of villagers across my empire, but I never interact with them. So I thought that this was interesting to use the clock to keep track of when the villager is restocked for trading again. I would have never thought about that. However, keeping a clock underground is a clever idea. Because, as you all know, it is a bit difficult to see if it is day or night outside if you have no access to the sky. I remember back in 2013 that I did in fact keep a clock down in an underground bunker for those exact same purposes as the commenter listed. I did not want to emerge on the top surface to a horde of flesh-eating zombies and all the other creepy crawlies that roam the overworld at night. Thank you for that comment, Ganubatel. Another commenter that also enjoys carrying a clock around on them is a fellow who goes by apprehensive _ hat 8986. They say, quote, more for personal RP role-playing than anything else, but I keep it in slot 9 of my quick bar. Compass immediately above it in inventory. When I'm in the deep mines, I like to be aware of the passing time. Also, lets me know if I'm heading into a surface full of phantoms and undeath, or a nice sunny day, i.e. no sense going topside just yet if it's midnight. The phantoms, end quote. I always forget about those pesky phantoms. That is another hostile mob that I would not like to encounter when climbing out of a mine or a cave. And if you have been down in a mine for several days and nights in a row without sleeping, then you will surely be greeted by these flying beasts. This comment is just another example of how a clock can be very handy when underground. I also like the fact that they carry it on them, on hand, and directly next to the compass. Direction and time all in one spot. Very convenient, and that is a very useful tip. Thank you, apprehensive _ hat 8986. That was a great comment. Moving on to second place in this poll with a total of 25 votes, which is a significant jump in comparison to the 8 votes that the yes group received. This was the occasional group. I see why so many people did put themselves in this group. I think it is one of those items that you will craft only for the sake of testing it out. Then you probably just set it aside. And it is probably used for decor or used occasionally while mining. I would like to read another comment from a person who uses the clock for decor purposes. Space _ goat _ V1 says, quote, I've only personally used it for decor, end quote. Oh, and right here, sorry, that was not the end. My server admin hands out invisible frames for participating in events, so I have 2 clocks on obsidian pillars to look like eyes. Hee hee, end quote. There, that was the end of that one. And I went on to say, I love that. What a creative server administrator you have, my friend. That is a very cool, and what a great use for invisible frames, which I've never even heard of such a thing. And a great way to add decor to your world. I have only placed them on pillars or in village squares in my empire. I have not got that creative with clocks and frames, I guess. Props to you for the creativity, and thank you for that comment, space _ goat _ V1. Now, moving on to the winner of this week's poll, over the Minecraft clock, out of a total of 83 votes, the winner received 50 of those. That is a blowout for the no group. The people who did not use this item at all. To me, this is a bit disappointing. I do not think it is because of the 4 gold ingots that it requires to make. But I honestly think it's because it's not really that practical. It's only practical for when you're underground. Sorry, my notes here got a little skewed. Yeah, the clock is just practical really if you're underground mining. And I guess if you really want one for decor. But when used for decor, it is rather expensive, because it's just there for display. It serves no practical use. Also, it is not that great that we can only put this clock inside of an item frame for decor purposes. It just does not look aesthetically pleasing in an item frame, so that kind of diminishes its value. That's just a personal opinion from me. I made the comment on this poll that we should be able to combine clocks together to make bigger ones. I want to make a big bin in my world, but this puny clock that fits in a small item frame can hardly be seen from 5 blocks high in the air. Also, I have read people complaining about the imprecision of it. That is all I have to say on that matter, but let's hear from another commenter who goes by Quaily Song, who says, quote, I used to use one to see when my villagers would restock, but nowadays I just listen for the sound, end quote. I wouldn't have thought about that, using the clock to time when villagers are restocked and able to trade again. This fascinates me, and I will have to let my brother, the Sun King, know about this, because he is the one out of the two of us who trades the most. Thank you for that comment, Quayle Song. And that wraps up poll time. We are now going to dive into the real, where I link real world knowledge with Minecraft. There are several questions that I would like to address. How did the ancients keep track of time? What devices did they use to measure it? In this segment, dubbed The Real, we will be exploring some of the ways our predecessors measured time. We have made our transition into the real, where we are talking about the construct of time thousands of years ago. Doing the research for this episode was very interesting. I found it fascinating how the ancients invented clever ways to keep track of time. Britannica.com has a fascinating article titled The 12-Hour Clock. Mesopotamia is the first civilization to be credited for creating a sophisticated system for keeping track of the year. The Sumerians, as the people were called that resided in Mesopotamia, were the ones responsible for our 12-month year. It appears it all started when they divided the year into 12, based off of the lunar patterns and the accompanying 12 zodiac signs. Scholars theorize that this may have led to the Babylonians to take this number 12 from the Sumerians and make that into the 12-hour clock that we are all familiar with today. Egypt was also developing methods for measuring the time. They approached it by using the night sky. The Egyptians divided the night into 12 equal parts based off something called an asterism. Asterisms are, quote, a group of stars that form a pattern in the night sky, end quote. Egyptians called them decans. Ancient Egypt divided their day into 10 hours. The two other remaining hours were used for the morning and evening twilight hours. The Egyptians, like the Romans, would measure time a couple different ways. Sundials for the day, water clocks for the night, which segues us to sundials. Britannica.com goes on to state that sundials are the most ancient form of telling time, and this is thanks to an object called the gnomon, spelled Gnomon, gnomon. Funny spelled word that I am probably not saying correctly, even though I looked up the pronunciation. They say, quote, the gnomon is a device originally meant as an instrument for calculating the time. In its most simple form, it seems to have been a rod placed vertically on a plane surface, later upon the surface of a hemisphere. End quote. And an interesting fact to add to the gnomon, the thing that casts the shadow is the shadow that it casts is referred to as the gnomon. So the gnomon casts the gnomon shadow. And you read what time it is in accordance to where the shadow lands on the dial, which is all part of the sundial. I just want to give you a basic idea of what makes a sundial, well, a sundial. Moving on to another article titled A Walk Through Time, Early Clocks, found at NIST.org, otherwise known as the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States of America. After the Sumerian culture in Mesopotamia disappeared without passing along most of their knowledge, the Egyptians were the next civilization to begin partitioning the day and night into units of time. They started by building obelisks, otherwise very large gnomon, as I described earlier, right? In order to give a rudimentary way to tell time by the shadow it casted upon the earth. Obelisks were constructed as early as 3500 BCE. As with all technology, including stone technology, it became more efficient and smaller throughout time. The oldest known portable sundial that has become discovered is called the Egyptian shadow clock, dated to 1500 BCE, which I would like to go on record by saying that I love the term shadow clock. It is just a fascinating way of seeing the sundial differently, and it makes sense. It is the shadow that is indicating the time. How the shadow clock would work is that they would set the base of this clock up, orienting it east to west. They would then, on the east end of the base, add the gnomon, which was T-shaped in this case. This would cast a shadow on the base, and according to how they had it marked out, would indicate that time. Once the sun hit noon, where it casts the small shadow, they would move the gnomon to the west end of the base in order for it to track the time for the latter half of the day, or turn the monoform piece itself to redirect the gnomon. Sometimes these shadow clocks were just one uniform piece, and they would just simply turn it, reorient it as the day crossed the noon mark. The dial on these shadow clocks had 5 spaced marks, which made the 10 spaces that indicated the 10-hour day. The extra 2 hours were dubbed the twilight hours, like I mentioned before. 1 hour for dawn and 1 hour for dusk. I thought this was all just an ingenious idea. However, this basic sundial and the obelisks were improved upon throughout the centuries, which leads us to the hemispherical sundial. Imagine a square piece of block with its bowl carved openly on the top half, like an open half sphere. This hemispherical sundial was invented for better accuracy throughout the year, because seasonal sunlight hours change as a year moves on. Traditional sundials could not tell time accurately throughout the year. The hemispherical sundial still used a gnomon that was more like a stylus, which went over the middle of the hemisphere. The ancients had etched lines where the shadow was during different seasons. That way, they were able to tell time in winter and in summer to a further degree of accuracy. This was invented around 300 BCE and was a huge improvement on timekeeping in comparison to the basic sundial or Egyptian shadow clock. This is all great, and I am sure that this was wonderful to have back in ancient times, but it raises an important question. How did they track time during the night? Observing constellations in the night sky was the earliest form of keeping time during the nocturnal hours. It wasn't until the water clock was invented that humans were able to tell the time 24 hours a day, round the clock. Some water clocks were as simple as a metal bowl with a small hole in the center. When this filled up and sank, this would indicate a given amount of time. This was probably good for speech giving and other clerical type duties, but probably not the most effective way of keeping time all night long. However, this method was used until 20th century in northern Africa. More elaborate water clocks started to emerge. The Greeks called water clocks clepsydras, or water thieves, which I found to be a clever name. They started to use these around 325 BCE, but the oldest water clock was found in the Egyptian tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep. Sorry, my pronunciation on Egyptian pharaohs isn't that great. The pharaoh's name was Amenhotep I, dated back to 1500 BCE. These water clocks were stone vessels with sloped sides which allowed water to drip from a small hole that was near the bottom of the vessel. Water would drip from this vessel at a near constant rate and fill up another vessel. As the receptacle filled, they would read markings that were etched on the interior of it that indicated the hours. This was used to indicate the time at night and may have been used also during the day to track time 24/7. These clepsydras became more elaborate over the centuries. They devised ways to regulate water pressure in order to move a more accurate flow of water to measure time. They adorned these with elaborate mechanizations that opened doors and shutters which displayed people and other displays, like very fancy cuckoo clocks. Some rang bells and gongs as well. There is a very famous one that is located in Athens, Greece, built by a famous Macedonian astronomer named Andronikos. Andronikos built for all the shoppers and scholars in Athens a 24-hour mechanized clepsydra or water clock. It displayed the 8 winds for which it is named after, and also displayed the hour, seasons throughout the year, and the astrological dates and periods. I wish I could jump in a time machine and see this clepsydra in person. I just imagine that this was a beautiful constructed machine with much craftsmanship put into it. Its remnants remain in Athens today. It is more like an can't talk right now. It's more like an octagonal stone tower that just sits there and remains if you go visit it currently, this day and age. It's more of a ruin. It would be worth checking out, though, if you happen to be visiting Greece. I would definitely go check that out. But my list, after starting this podcast and doing all this research, is getting longer and longer, and Greece is adding to that as well, especially since I've been doing so much research on Roman gods in the past episodes. I probably have about 20 places I want to go, and if I ever make it over to Greece. I have probably a lifetime worth of things I want to visit in Europe in general. Now, these water clocks were an astonishingly great invention for that era, but water is a fickle element and is hard to achieve an accurate measurement of time using it. It just is. Humans were forced to abandon the clepsydra and go into and explore mechanical clocks, which brings me back full circle to Britannica.com once again, who says that mechanical clocks started to emerge in the Middle Ages. The oldest known mechanical clock is located at the Dunstable Priory in Bedfordshire, England. It is a faceless clock, meaning that it has no hour indicators, and it dates back to 1283 CE, which is just simply amazing to me. Mechanical clocks at first were better than nothing, but they did not keep the time too accurately. However, we started to fix this problem. The first clocks that tried to solve the problem of synchronicity amongst clocks in other countries were called the Italian clock. It was given this title based off the fact that these clocks were calibrated off of astrological time indications from Italian and Flemish contexts. Who knows why it wasn't called the Flemish clock? This was a system of tracking time using the 12-hour system with astrology. This, however, proved to not be a great system for time tracking, and for some reason, the strokes of these clocks, when it was telling the time, while it was ticking, essentially, wore out the material in the manner in which it moved, which I wish that this article would have explained more about how it wore, quote unquote, wore away the material. It kind of left me to just assume things, and I didn't really investigate that much further into that. But to me, it sounds like the clock strokes were too powerful and led to the wearing out of the mechanism itself, or whatever it was made out of. They say that a new system called the French hour or small hours became the popular system, replacing the Italian clock, and I guess this fixed this wearing out of the material by it using smaller strokes. Maybe it wasn't as forced or as hard on the mechanism. I'm not sure how it worked, but this used a 24-hour system. Researching this article just showed me that time is purely relative and can be made by just anyone. Anyone. All you need is something that gives you a constant movement and a way to track its pace. You can make a clay pot and put a pinhole in the bottom of it and fill it up. The time it empties is 1 unit of time. You could go ahead and call it bowl time or cup time or whatever time you want to call it. Name it after yourself. Like, I'll name it the Dark Lord hour or minute. It's just an example. Now, ancients used a method just like this. They invented a myriad of ways to measure time using the simplest materials that can be found on Earth. Egyptian shadow clocks were made out of stone, so were obelisks, and bowls were made out of other materials like metal and clay. And then they had clepsydras or water clocks to help measure time that they devised, and many other clever ways to tell time that were not mentioned in today's episode. It wasn't until the Middle Ages that we started to develop methods of keeping time that are familiar with clocks today. However, we have surpassed that and went beyond by inventing very precise ways to tell time, such as atomic clocks. I hope that you found this as fascinating as I did. You now have no excuse to not be able to tell what time it is. Just look at a flagpole and determine its length of shadow on the ground. With that said, it is time to go back into the overworld, back to the realm of the show, folks, where I will teach you how to make your very own clock in Minecraft. Welcome back to the realm, my friends. The Minecraft clock has been around the game for quite some time. According to minecraft.wiki.com, titled Clocks, the clock was first released in version 1.2.0, otherwise known as the Halloween update. It is known as this because it was released the day before Halloween on October 30th, 2010. This update was when the Nether was added to the game. As we have covered in the poll, the Minecraft clock is a great item to have when you want to add some flair to, let's say, your village, home, or a fort, or for whatever build. And it proves to be of great use when you have been mining away underground for days on end and want to know if it is safe to go back to the surface. Well, I would like to tell you how you can make your own Minecraft clock, or sometimes called watch. It is a rather expensive item, but it is easy to make. All you need is 4 gold ingots and 1 redstone dust. Add these materials together at the crafting table, and this will produce 1 clock. If you do not want to craft a clock, then you have a very small percentage of finding one in one of 2 places, that being shipwrecks and ruined portals. And I can testify to not finding a clock out of all the ruined portals discovered and the 4 shipwrecks that I have investigated. Maybe because there is only a 7.3% chance of a clock being in one of these 2 locations. Now, allow me to describe this item to you. I would say that it is an extremely rare piece in the entire game of Minecraft. Not because of its aesthetic value or usability, but because of its shape. It is the shape of a typical clock or watch. It is round, and that is what makes this so unique in Minecraft. Compasses, fire charges, and snowballs are some of the other rare examples of a round object in the game, but the clock, there's not too many things in this game that are round, so that's why it stands out and is so unique, is what I'm trying to put out there to you. To further describe the clock, the frame of the clock is pure gold, which makes sense because it's mostly made of gold. And it has a display on the upper half of its face. This display shows the moon and the sun in accordance to where these celestial bodies are in the sky in real time. It is not the most accurate clock in the world, but it works well enough to tell you if it is safe to go outside. The display moves clockwise. You'll see a little moon and a sun just rotating clockwise around this. The clock is a stackable inventory item that can be stacked up to 64. Clocks can be hung in an item frame, held in hand, thrown on the ground, or put in your inventory. No matter where the clock is on the overworld, it will display the time of day accurately. But I must let you know that your clock will be completely useless in the end and nether dimensions, because there is no time in those places. The clock, if brought to these spots, will just spin continuously out of control. However, the clock may serve a use in the nether. Regardless of it not being able to tell the time, if you recall episode 26, piglins, zombie piglins, and piglin brutes, then you will recall that piglins are vicious gold lovers, and that includes the golden clock. Now, you cannot barter with the piglin by using the clock, but you can throw it on the ground, and the piglin will pick it up and examine the item for about 6 to 8 seconds. This is a great strategy to use if you have mildly aggravated one of these creatures and it is chasing you down to attack you. The gold clock will distract them long enough for you to hopefully make it to safety or to properly engage in combat. This small but useful tip may save your life one day in the Nether. Before wrapping up this show, I would like to read a few more comments on the question, do you use the Minecraft clock? Mr. Yeast66 says, quote, "It would have been great if it wasn't so hard to understand and you could use it without even crafting it, like put the ingredients in the crafting table and don't click the clock and it will show the time and should have been placeable like mob heads, not in an item frame. It just looks ugly," end quote. I agree, Mr. Yeast66. It does look very ugly in that puny item frame. I truly do not understand why we cannot make different sized clocks in the game, such as being able to add 4 clocks together to make a grand clock, or maybe being able to craft a grandfather clock for your house. Being able to hook it up to redstone, in my opinion, would be an absolute plus as well, especially amongst redstone tech enthusiasts. I do not know if I agree with it being able to show you the time on the crafting table prior to having it actually crafted, though. That would render its creation useless, and in theory, how can something that does not exist yet be able to tell you the time in your actual world? It just doesn't make sense to me. But yes, please make it placeable like mob heads. That's a great idea. Thank you very much for that comment, Mr. Ye66. Moving on to Helo Stopper, they say, quote, "No," end quote. That was it. A solemn no. And I get it. It really does not do much, and you will more than likely be fine underground without it. To me, it is just a waste of gold that could be used on power rails. But I do have a couple in my empire as a demonstration of wealth. The last comment comes from _Galvin_. They say, quote, "Not really these days. I always run a data pack that gives me coordinates, they're trying to say, and in-game time. But if you don't, then a clock might be useful to keep in your ender chest," end quote. I never thought about using data packs or other means like this for a clock. I love the idea, though. However, I will probably not do that. I won't download any of those data packs. I play as vanilla as possible, but maybe you listeners out there will take that tip and run with it. Nothing wrong with data packs. I hope that you all had a great time learning about the overworld clock. I suggest crafting one, just to say that you did and for the experience of it. They are just kind of fun to look at, if I was to be honest. Time is an important tool in human society. It has been so for thousands of years, starting with Mesopotamia and being perfected each continuous year. Time is not going anywhere as long as humans are around. The Egyptians, like the Sumerians, had learned to divide their days and nights into readable units of time by using obelisks, shadow clocks, and clepsydras, otherwise known as water clocks. The clepsydra was advanced further by the Greeks and Romans throughout the centuries until they were abandoned in the Middle Ages with the advent of the mechanical clock. Such as time in real life, time in Minecraft is also important. It can be the matter of life or death. Night brings out the most violent, hostile mobs. Having a clock underground with you while mining may help save you from making an error of returning to the surface during nightfall. The clock is also a good item to place inside an item frame. It can make a home feel a little more like home. I hope you all find some great uses for the clock in your overworld. And do not forget to store one on hand for your adventure into the Nether. It may come in handy if you need to distract a horde of piglins. I wish each and every one of you out there an amazing rest of your week and a great weekend, or whichever day it is that you are listening to this episode. I will see you all next Thursday right here at Realm News. The Dark Lord signing out.